So we are going to be recording this, so it will be available on our website shortly, as well as all the manuals, guidelines, etc. And we will also send out an email afterwards to all the attendees that will provide that information as well. So let me go on to the next slide. And just I've started using Microsoft Teams recently, so this is our first webinar using Microsoft Teams. It is a little different for us, so hopefully everything will go smoothly today. But here's some of the features of that. Please keep your microphone turned off throughout. Everybody should be muted, but please keep that so we don't have any background noise from that. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those in the chat feature. So that's there on the left. Looks like a little chat window bubble. So please use that to ask any questions. So I just want to give you a little brief introduction about this round. We are going to be splitting the fiscal year 24 IRF funds into two rounds. So we'll have this first round of, this will be all ARPA funding. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means for any applications that come from this round. And then we'll have another round later on in the fall. So the focus of this round is really going to be more on shovel-ready projects. I mean, we talk about that every round, but it's going to be more important this round. So instead of kind of the 6-month time frame that we typically look at, we're going to really be looking at those projects that are going to be ready to go within the next 3 months. So after the anticipated announcement of these, which we anticipate would hopefully come in July. I know we've had some delays over the last couple of rounds, but originally when we were kind of looking at the ARPA funding, this was kind of the time frame that we were looking at for fiscal year 24. But with some of the delays and some of the planning grants, allowing them to get done, those have kind of pushed us back a little bit, but we wanted to have that available for those projects that maybe got planning grants back in the winter of 2022 and weren't able to apply in the implementation round for fiscal year 23, or those projects that may not have been quite ready and didn't get funded in fiscal year 23 that may now be ready to go. So that is going to be a bigger focus for us this round than we typically have. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So with that, I will turn it over to Brandon Archer, who's a program administrator for the IRF program, and he'll kind of go through the presentation today. So Brandon, take it away.
Thanks, Tori. Thanks, everybody, for joining this webinar. As Tori mentioned, this is intended to serve as an overview of DHCD's upcoming round of grants and loans that are intended to fund construction in fiscal year 24. We're going to cover several topics during this webinar, starting with a brief overview of the program, some of the eligibility requirements, how applications are scored and awarded, as well as a rundown of how the applications are completed. Following that review, we'll open the webinar up at the end to questions from attendees. As Tori mentioned, since we have some time allocated at the end of the webinar, if something comes up you want to chat about, either jot that question down and save it for later or type it into the chat. We've got Annie and Durante in there monitoring the chat, and we can answer those questions at the conclusion of the webinar. So the IRF is intended to fund community development projects across the state that have a significant impact on local economies. IRF is intended for projects that are shovel-ready and catalytic that stimulate private investment, job creation, and activity in distressed areas. Finding projects that are shovel-ready enables us to make investments in communities and support projects that can help support economic development initiatives. Having an effective team or network of partners is critical to producing shovel-ready projects, so projects during this round of funding should be under contract within 3 months of the award announcements, and projects should be complete within 16 months of contract. To help support that timeline, local resolutions are not necessarily going to be needed at the time of the application, but they will be required before contracts are signed. Since 2012, IRF has supported 47 projects across the state, and we've generated over $136 million in public and private investment, while also supporting the creation of more than 500 jobs. That's quite an impact on the state. ARPA funds were allotted to states in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, intending to fund rehabilitation of vacant derelict structures that are no longer suited for their original purpose. As mentioned before, those funds are intended to eliminate blight through market-driven redevelopment and to help communities, businesses, and economies recover from pandemic-related hardships. ARPA applications will include questions related to the impact of COVID on your community, so developing strong narratives that display that hardship is key to building a strong application. Similar to previous IRF funding rounds, this round will include grants and loans of up to $5 million and will match requirements for all awards over $1 million. Be mindful that if you request $1 million or less, no match is required, but if you request over, you are required to match all that money. There will be 2 rounds of funding, as Tori mentioned, this being the first. The second is intended to still come in the fall of 2023. And also remember that only local units of government can apply for these IRF funds, but they are allowed to apply on behalf of nonprofits or for-profit entities. So there's a few changes in this grant round. As we mentioned previously, to date, ARPA has already funded 40 planning grants totaling nearly $2.3 million. The program has also supported 15 implementation projects with a total investment exceeding $23 million. Aside from some of the changes regarding project readiness, this round of funding will also be restricted to 1 application per locality. Previously, localities were allowed to submit 2 applications per round. If your locality has been considering 2 projects, you'll need to rethink which project is more shovel ready before the application deadline of June 23rd. The state will open applications for this round on May 1. So far this year, DHCD has already funded a round of planning grants for IRF, and many of those planning activities have already commenced. For this round of grants, up to $10 million is available for award, and again, applications are going to open on May 1 and close on June 23rd. The expectation is to have these awards announced in the summer and then announce another round of grants in the fall, and those fall applications will have a deadline of October 28th, 2023. We know it's a tight timeline, but we are confident there's plenty of projects ready to go. Think closely about how to prioritize your projects and develop reasonable timeframes for completion so that should your project receive funding, all activities can be completed within our timeframes. So we're going to begin to discuss eligible properties. As stated earlier, IRF is intended to target vacant, deteriorated, and blighted structures whose conditions creates a notion of economic blight in the area and is a deterrent to the surrounding area. Targeting properties that fit these criteria can help you develop a worthy, ready project. Some common types of properties we encounter are old manufacturing facilities, department stores, warehouses, theaters, hotels, shopping centers, and old school buildings. Be mindful that greenfield sites are ineligible to apply, as are solely residential sites. And for those projects that involve a mixed-use component, 30% of that total square footage at the end of the project must be classified as commercial. Allowable activities are those activities that can be billed or allocated by IRF funds. The program is flexible so that funds can be used for a range of redevelopment activities, including acquisition, rehabilitation, or repair. Funds can also be used for demolition, removal, and other physical activities. Be mindful that IRF funds are not intended to solely fund acquisition. While acquisition can be an allowable cost, the intent of IRF is to support hard construction costs. Additionally, for any projects proposing demolition, a plan for redevelopment will be required. The same logic applies to demolition in that IRF should not be used to solely fund that activity. Generally, demolition should only be used in circumstances where the size or the location of a building precludes redevelopment potential, or in cases where there's already an imminent safety threat posed by that building. Please note, grant administration is not an eligible activity for IRF. Up to 5% of local match can count towards grant administration and will be considered as match or leverage, but not as an IRF cost. So in terms of who can apply for the IRF awards, only the following entities, which is local governments, which is cities, counties, or towns, or your regional or local economic or industrial development authorities. Units of government can apply directly for funding to use on publicly owned property or on behalf of a for-profit or nonprofit entity looking to develop privately owned property. Localities also have the option to designate a redevelopment authority or another similar organization as an agent for project implementation and administration. An important distinction for IRF funding is the possibility of receiving either a grant or a loan. The project will be funded as a grant if any of the following 3 conditions are met. The property is publicly owned, The privately owned property has an option agreement in place for purchase by a local government at the time of application, or the private property is owned by a not-for-profit tax-exempt entity. Funds will be considered a loan when the property is owned by a private for-profit entity and the end product will be owned by a private for-profit business. In cases of loans, the IRF funds will be funded to the local government, who in then turn will make the loan to the for-profit entity. As mentioned previously, a locality may submit only one application per FY24 funding round. Identifying projects with the most meaningful impact on local community revitalization should be considered. As such, a resolution from the local governing body authorizing the request for funding is an application requirement. Resolutions will be required before awarded projects go to contract, so you should really think about getting your resolution as quickly as possible. As the previous slide acknowledged, IRF funds can be grants or loans. So we're going to take a minute to look at the terms that are offered of those loans. Loan agreements will involve an interest rate of 2.5% and have a 20-year amortization. The terms of the length can be negotiated on a project-by-project basis, but all terms must be agreed to by DHCD. Environmental reviews are also required, and if a developer is involved in the project, performance agreements will also be part of this.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd like to add to that, Brandon, is that in the case where the locality either does not want to administer the loan or doesn't have the capacity to administer the loan, we can have a loan administered by Virginia Community Capital and under the same, pretty much the same terms and rates. There is a one-time application fee for that, like a 5% application fee for VCC loans, but that is another option if the locality or IDA, EDA either doesn't want to or can't administer the loan.
So now we're going to spend some time discussing match. Match is an important part of an IRF application, and a strong match amount can help identify projects with financial support already into the project. While match is only required for projects over $1 million, the presence of match for projects under $1 million is also a great sign of project readiness and viability. Match can come from public or private sources, and the match must be cash or documented costs that are directly associated with the property. Local match can include federal, state, local, and private funds that have been spent within the last full fiscal year, beginning on or after July 1, 2022. Eligible match can include acquisition costs, construction-related soft costs, investments to machinery and tools, notices, permits or fees, and other documented costs directly associated with physical activity on site. Again, no more than 5% of local match will be accepted as in-kind for out-of-pocket admin costs. Some sources of ineligible match include state or local taxes, site remediation, interest, principal payments on debt, or investments in personal or tangible property such as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So in terms of our funding priorities, DHCD has identified 6 different funding areas. Note that these priorities are not listed by importance, as some factors weigh heavier than others, and we'll discuss that later. The priorities for DHCD projects includes a relationship to a local or regional economic development strategy, properties with a high degree of blight, project readiness, projects with a clear end uses that have clear impacts on the economic activity of the area, and project localities that are experiencing high economic distress. So when we get your applications, all applications are scored across a rubric, and they're also, we review these as a team. Through this application process, greater priority will be given this year to those projects that display a high level of readiness. That's what Tori was speaking to as far as the ready-to-go, shovel-ready projects. After the team has considered and reviewed all the applications, those scoring highest will be awarded and will continue in descending order until all the funds are allocated. In no case will applications scoring less than 70% be considered for award. A strong application will be able to display the project is ready to go, but also could not be finished without IRF funds. Projects should not rely solely on IRF funds, and IRF funds should not be taking the place of traditional lending. All other financial resources should be exhausted before IRF is utilized, as the program is intended to serve as gap funding. This slide is a representation of how DHCD is going to score applications for this cycle. As you can see, project readiness is the priority. Relationship to a local strategy counts for 10%. Clear end use constitutes another 10%, and economic impact is 20% of the overall score, while the level of distress counts for 15% and match and leverage counts for 5%. There are also other considerations that can help an application gain an extra 5%, such as the amount of match in proportion to the amount requested, or the use of SWAM vendors and other factors. And we'll discuss some of these later when we get to the extra credit sheet. So let's say you're confident that you have a project that's ready to go and you meet all the criteria that we've discussed. Now you're ready for CAMS. The first step is to register your organization in CAMS, which can be done using the link on the screen. Some of you may also be familiar with CAMS already, and for others, this might be your first foray into the system for managing applications. Make sure you give yourself enough time to familiarize yourself with the system to avoid delays during the application process. After you've registered, you can start your application in CAMS. And after you've set up your account and got your password figured out, you'll be able to select IRF as a choice and then start your application. Be sure to save each page often when you work. CAM may time you out if no activity has occurred over a period of time, and you don't want to lose the information you've been typing into the project narratives. As you work through the application, you also have the option to save the application and come back to it later. Be sure to always save before exiting any page. Applications are going to be accepted until midnight, June 23rd. That's the deadline. But also be mindful that state agency staff will not be available after 5 p.m. that day. We often get questions all the way up to the deadline, but once everybody leaves, you might not have a chance to get anything answered. So we will be here and be available in the days leading up to that deadline. So if you have any questions, it's best to get them to us as quickly as you can so we can get those covered and get your application in before the deadline comes. So once you're in CAMS, this is a screenshot of the basic application screen. You'll navigate according to the tabs. The tabs are the sections of the application at the top of this screenshot. They include project information, project budget, the narrative information, attachments, and some additional information related to the project. Project information is just some basic contact info for your organization, as well as the physical location of the project. An important note to also consider, when you're in this section, be sure to list the addresses appropriately. Often we see that when you're listing the project site, a lot of localities will list their town hall or their headquarters. Make sure you're reporting the actual project site. We do some due diligence on the front end once we have project information, property records, just to validate ownership. So we just want to make sure that all that information is in there from the beginning, just to avoid any hiccups down the line. Also, here, when you're in the project budget tab, you're going to report all funding in the appropriate categories, as you can see. And you're also going to provide a written narrative to support those line items. Be sure to report all activities needed to bring the project to completion, as this helps present a ready-to-go project. In the case of activities funded by other sources, you'll use that other funding category. Be sure to list all sources of non-IRF funds going into the project. This is the project overview section. The project summary sheet is the first document that the state really sees when we review your application, so reporting this information accurately is critical. This includes the locality applying for the funds, the address, and the other background information such as the year of construction, the owner, the end user, if applicable at the time of application, the total project budget, as well as job creation projections. This is a high-level report of the project, and more detail will be provided within the application. So as it relates to the funding priorities mentioned earlier, we can now take a look at some of the considerations that the state makes. In identifying a relationship to a local or regional economic development strategy, you should discuss any precedent plans or strategies that your project would support or align with, and you should also discuss recent public or private investment that also contributes to the success of the project. This is your chance to position your project within the local strategy, which can help convey public support for the project or the willingness of local government to support your development. In terms of clarifying how blight and deterioration can be addressed, here you should discuss how you selected the property in lieu of other projects in your locality. How did you determine that this project was the highest community priority? You're also going to describe how the project was determined to be blighted and how its derelict status negatively impacts the community. Think about how the current condition impacts the surrounding area, and be sure to include photographs in the attachments section to support your statements. While it's not necessary to provide photos of every square foot of the building space, providing visual documentation of the major areas and the totality of the building should be provided. Without visual representation, it's difficult for the state to really assess deterioration and blight. Providing photos of the interior and exterior of the building is useful. Also, paying particular attention to those areas that are directly supported by IRF funds. So, for example, if you're mentioning that you're going to demolish a roof or you're going to put in new flooring, it's going to be beneficial for you to provide photos of those areas so that we could really get a gauge of just how the budget lines up with the need for construction. As we mentioned earlier, project readiness and having shovel-ready projects is really the key driver for this round. Be sure to report any of those public or private investments involved with the project. Also, give us clear work timelines and projections and any other information you believe supports project readiness. A clear work plan with sound timelines can make the difference in positioning projects for success. And conversely, projects without clear work plans and timelines may have difficulty completing all activities in the allotted timeframe. Here we see the project status sheet. This helps DHCD understand the current status of the project in terms of where it is in its phase of development. Be sure to indicate all activities that have happened leading up to this point, including any zoning changes that were needed, how or if tax credits will be utilized, as well as listing out all financing sources and describing the finality of the design process. Be sure to include all steps that remain before you expect the project to be completed. Here we see the match funding chart. This is how we ensure all financial sources have been positioned correctly and the anticipated date of receipt of those funds. Include all sources of funding in the left column, both public and private. This could be from philanthropic organizations, local public funds, and private investment. Be sure to include the amount received in funding, and if the process is still underway, such as historic tax credit applications, be sure to report the anticipated date of receipt. Remember that all sources of financing will need to be finalized before any projects that are awarded will move to contract. So we also want to paint a good picture of the intended end use of the property. In previous years, some projects have received funding that have not necessarily identified an end use or user. Since this round tends to be more competitive than in previous rounds, it's going to be important to zero in on that end use early in the process, if applicable. Documents to support your projected end use could be market studies, feasibility studies, pro formas, and other economic viability data. If possible, providing a copy of the in-use business plan as well is going to be helpful for the state to really determine your project's readiness. Also use this section to describe how the end users will be recruited and secured, and also discuss any current interests or commitments in this section. It's also expected that the applicant provides some figures related to the operating budget once the project has stabilized. This gives the state a good idea of, this is a financially viable project. We don't want to support any projects that, fizzle out after a year or so. We want to make sure that these are long-term projects that are going to provide stability in the community and helps keeps things moving forward. In terms of detailing projects and their end use, spend some time preparing a narrative on the expected community impact, such as new and full-time jobs, new businesses created, and leveraged private investment. This information helps us create goals for the project that must be achieved before the grant or loan will be closed out. Also describe projected increases in local sales, meals, or lodging tax revenues, anticipated increases in tourism, and you may also find it beneficial to include information about the indirect outcomes of the project, such as access to services or resources for residents, workforce development, and quality of life improvements. This is a template of the distress scores, which is used to help identify communities that receive tiered support from the state. Localities with a high distress score require additional support beyond what other localities may receive. As you can see, highly distressed communities receive 150 application points, while above average communities receive 100. There's also a lower tier of communities that receive 50, and then localities that do not have a level of distress receive 0. This can often be a huge factor in helping distressed communities put forth applications in a stronger light. Remember that you must score above a certain threshold to receive an award. A complete version of this list is available, so if you don't see your locality listed, it may be in another tier. Contact me or anyone on the team after this webinar if you have any questions related to your locality's distress score. This is the extra credit chart. As we mentioned earlier, there's some bonus points that can be earned for meeting a number of criteria. All of those are listed here. First, is this project in a revenue sharing district, or has it been cited in a formal regional development strategy? Is this project eligible for local real property abatement or local incentives to encourage investment? Is it in an enterprise zone? Is it in a CDBG project area? Is it in a special district, such as a designated Main Street, a local, state, or federal historic district, tourism zones, technology zones, opportunity zones? And also, does your project have a committed leverage in excess of 1-to-1 match? And then also, is your project committed to using SWAM vendors and contractors throughout the bidding and procurement process? Lastly, be sure to include any necessary attachments to your application, such as local assurances, local resolutions, photos of the property, maps, pro formas, business plans. Any information you give us gives more context to your project narrative. And if anything you can provide can help us get a clearer picture of the project is welcome. And providing this information up front kind of keeps projects moving forward. During the application review process, the state agency may reach out to you to request information anyway. So if everything is with the application before the due date, we can review the applications without interruption. For local assurances, be sure the chief administrative officer for the locality signs the document, and for resolutions, the governing body of the locality must authorize the application for IRF funds and document the specific dollar amount in IRF matching funds if applicable. If the locality is applying on behalf of a nonprofit or a for-profit entity, the resolution should document the specific match amount and indicate that it is the responsibility of that entity to come up with the match as appropriate. We can now open up, that concludes the webinar. We can kind of open up for any Q&A that you guys may have. So for the first two, I saw two pop in. Yes, we'll have a copy of this PowerPoint that we can make available. And yes, we can also, I think we have some template resolutions that have been provided. We can kind of blur out any identifying information. Just reach out to anybody on the team and we can share a template with you just to give you an idea. We also have other document templates such as, contracts, performance agreements, those sort of things. So if you have any questions related to how you should structure those or how they should be arranged, we probably have some that we can share with you that might inform your process as well.
Yes, and in the application manual, there are those templates for the resolution and the local assurances letter as well. There's a question about only one application per locality. Does this apply to towns and counties as a whole, or are we allowed to submit one application each? So that's a good question. I think we would consider probably a town and the county as separate, even though the town is part of the county. It's not an independent city. But we could probably talk more about that if you have two specific projects with that. There's another question about the second deadline in October. Will that also include ARPA funds? Yes. So with our second round in October, we'll have any remaining ARPA funds as well as the 1.5 million in state funds. So we anticipate that to be probably somewhere around the 10 million range again in total. So yes, we will have should have some ARPA funds remaining for that round as well as the state funds. And yes, we'll have the PowerPoint available to you. It's on our website, so you can share that with your city council or anyone else that you might need to as well. And of course, we'll make the PowerPoint available on the website as well as, like I said, we'll send out an email most likely tomorrow with a copy of the PowerPoint and the link to the presentation that we are doing right now. So Another question is, are there going to be planning grants available soon? So no, we are not anticipating any more planning grant rounds. Those have all completed, and we anticipate all of the ARPA funds being used up these next 2 rounds. So we don't anticipate having any more planning grant rounds. Do the eligible properties have to be in their downtown district for the IRF program? No, they don't have to be within a downtown district. That is just one of the extra points, that you can get if it is within a designated Main Street district. But it can be anywhere. Doesn't have to be in a downtown district, but you'd probably need to show that it's, it would be a catalytic project. So those that are kind of out in not close to some other development, those won't score as high in that area as if they are kind of closer in and have some, could potentially be a catalytic projects for additional investments, things of that sort. The project end date. So yeah, we anticipate like Brandon said, for this current round, we would anticipate probably being under contract by October at the very latest, if not before. And once you are under contract, there's an 18-month window to complete the project. Another question, does the 1 application per locality mean only 1 in this fiscal year or just 1 this round? So it's 1 per round. So if there are, say there's 2 properties within your locality that have a high interest for IRF, you could potentially apply for 1 of those this round and then apply for another one in the round in the fall. But you are limited to 1 per locality per round. Another question is, can a PDC be an applicant? That's a good question. We would have to kind of look into that. I don't think we've ever had a PDC actually be an applicant. Typically, the PDCs may help a locality with an application or provide some of the grant administration for a grant, but I don't recall that they've ever been an applicant themselves.
There was also another one in the chat regarding the 30% commercial space threshold. Yes, that is a strict 30%. This is also something where a lot of mixed-use projects have trouble. So we get this question a lot, and we do our calculations. We may have to reach back out and get additional like floor plans, and we may even ask you to provide like a chart just showing how the space is allocated. It generally gets kind of dicey because we have to consider like hallways, stairways, storage space. There's a lot of different considerations. So whatever you can provide on the front end to show that you guys are going to have above that 30% commercial space threshold is going to be very useful in us establishing your project.
Yeah. There's another question about the VCC loan. So yes, like I said, VCC can administer the loans if the locality does not want to or doesn't have the capacity to do so. VCC actually, in the past, always administered the IRF grant loans. So anytime there was a private developer in the project, we would run those loans through Virginia Community Capital. It's only been the last couple of years that we've allowed the localities to administer those if they wish to kind of create a revolving loan fund in their locality. But so I can provide some additional information to you on that, David. So, on those loans. Really the only difference, we have an MOU with Virginia Community Capital, and I believe there's someone here in the webinar from VCC as well. The only difference between if it's run through the locality and VCC, so they would handle all of the loan documents, things of that sort. But there is like an application fee. I think it's a 5% application fee. So, or 0.5% application fee. I can't remember what that is. Or maybe less than that. I can't remember the exact number. There is a small application fee for those projects that are administered by VCC. Someone's asking if the distress chart is going to be the same as the fiscal year 23 chart. Yes. As of right now, that distress score chart is going to remain the same. We have not updated anything from last year. If a project is underway currently for phase 1 of construction, is phase 2 for completion eligible for funds? Yeah, potentially. That might be something you might want to reach out to us about, and kind of so we can get a little bit more information about the project and what you're looking at there. And then of course, at any time throughout the application process between now and June 23rd, if you have any questions about a potential project or questions about the application process or want us to kind of review some things, we're happy to do that as well. So just reach out to us, either to Brandon or myself or anyone on the team, or just send it to the realestate@dhcd.virginia.gov email address, and we'll be happy to answer any of those for them. Yeah, Brandon put his email address in there in the chat as well, so, or me myself. So again, I think we've covered most of the questions. Brandon or Andy, are there any other ones that you've seen?
No, I think that's everything I've seen.
Okay. Well, again, we thank everyone for attending today, and we're really excited about being able to kind of open up this kind of interim round, kind of do it sooner than what we were going to be able to do otherwise. And so again, we're really going to focus on those shovel ready. The readiness is going to be the big focus this time. So again, we anticipate these projects being underway by October at the latest. So that's kind of what our thinking is. And so if you have a project that you think may be in there, but might in that time frame, but maybe a little bit out of that, you may want to wait a little bit to the next round. So we really hope and anticipate that the approval process is going to go a lot faster for these rounds. Now the administration knows about the program and kind of has a better understanding than they did kind of last year, when it was kind of the first year that they had been involved with that. So they're really excited about the program and the impact that it's making across the Commonwealth. So again, thank you all for your time and attention today, and please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.